What is up again, everybody? Before we get started with this video, I want to give a shout out to Jake Hutt for the idea and the push behind this new series. He sent me a Facebook message and suggested that we put together a list of the all-time greatest cards in the game, which is something that I had thought of right after we finished our community super rare rankings, but really never got around to. So starting today, this is the official, unofficial Dice Masters Hall of Fame. I have personally selected the first 3 cards entering the Hall of Fame myself based on several criteria, namely iconic, powerful cards that defined the game and the meta that they were in. After this video goes live, feel free to comment on it with your vote on which cards we should honor by adding them to the Hall of Fame. Without further ado, let's begin. The first card that we are going to induct into the Hall of Fame is Black Widow Sareena. This is one of the 4 super rares from the very first Dice Masters set ever released, Avengers vs. X-Men, or AVX for short. For those newer to the game, take a look at this card. It's a 2-cost with a decent stat line and an ability that says when Black Widow attacks, she deals 2 damage to your opponent. Your opponent can prevent this by spinning one of his or her character dice down 1 level. So imagine you're in this early meta with very limited total card pool and no blanking has entered the game yet, and you sit down at the table and across from you is this card, and your opponent goes first, and this was back when going first still meant rolling 4 dice, and they buy 2 Sareenas on turn 1 and 2 Sareenas on turn 2. Now imagine turn 3 and turn 4 when your opponent fields all of these dice and just keeps attacking you. If you don't have blockers, that also means you can't spin down any dice to prevent the when attacks ability. Oh, also don't forget that when attacks abilities trigger per attacking die, so each Sareena die that attacks is dealing you 2 damage, plus the combat damage they do if you can't block. This card immediately became a staple and remained a staple just about until the very first rotation. Its power level is so far spiked for a 2-drop that it earned a spot on a vast majority of competitive teams and was one of the reasons for the creation of several powerful control cards from the sets that released after it. This card, along with our next one, were so popular and powerful that at one point it was going for something like 80 to 100 bucks on eBay. This is an obvious pick for the Hall of Fame. Next up is another card that defined the early meta all the way until rotation. Green Goblin Gabi may not look too exciting now that the power level of cards has drifted up, but even now this card is pretty insane. Think about it. Cards with similar abilities like Norman Osborn, Firefly, and Boom Boom all require further purchases to be effective. With Gabi, you start the game with all of the ammo that you need to burn your opponent out. A common opening with a Gabi team would be to buy him turn 1 while fielding a sidekick, and then roll as many sidekicks as humanly possible on the following turn or 2. By turn 3 or 4, you could generally expect to have fielded something like 4 sidekicks, meaning that you get to just drop 4 damage on your opponent and then attack with that beefy 5/5 topside in order to cycle the when fielded effect. The added benefit to rolling all of those sidekicks, your bag is lean and churned through, and you have just enough to buy another Gabi and do it all again. And keep in mind, this was before blanking. Both Gabi and Sareena absolutely defined the early meta in Dice Masters, and I would be remiss if I did not include them both in this inaugural episode of the Dice Masters Hall of Fame. And then there was one card remaining, and it has perhaps defined the game more than any other card ever printed in Dice Masters. Professor X recruiting young mutants. Again, for those who are newer to the game and who may not have heard of, seen, or played with this card, it can best be summed up in this way. Back when it was around and I was teaching new players to play, I would teach them the basics of the game, turn order, attacking and blocking, all of that in one session. After playing a few times with that person, I would then spend the entirety of another session teaching them how to play the game with PXG. This card was that game defining. Here's another example of the power level of this card. If you were playing with this card on your team, or if your opponent had this card on your team and you weren't rolling 7 dice on your second turn of the game, then you were playing Dice Masters wrong. What I'm about to say some may not agree with, and if so, feel free to tell me about it in the comments below, but this card was the #1 reason why a set rotation was necessary in Dice Masters. It wasn't the only reason, but it was the foremost. If this card hadn't have rotated and we were still in Modern Age today, then all other forms of ramp that we have currently would be rendered largely obsolete. From a game design perspective, there was no design space to go further than this in the category of ramp and churn. There was no way to get better than this outside of something totally game-breaking, and this is pushing it. It is the absolute zenith of both ramp and churn. I personally loved it, and I can think of no better way to wrap up this first episode than to welcome PXG into the Dice Masters Hall of Fame. So there you have it. There are the first 3 cards to enter the Hall of Fame. Who's next? Let me know in a comment below what cards you think have earned a place of honor in Dice Masters. I'll let this video percolate a little bit, people to vote, collect up those votes in the comments below, and we'll throw another couple of cards into the Hall of Fame. As always, thanks for watching.